What's up? What's up? Thanks for showing up, guys. Y'all know how it is. Oh, I think I got something in my eye. Can y'all see that? Like it's itching. Like I don't know, dude.
What? That's.
You just went gray.
I know. I'm in the gray.
Is this some big reveal? Am I gonna have to hold on to the edge of my seat because? All right, Dave's in the house. Dave's in the house backstage. Yeah, let's do something here. Let's get this rolling.
Cool. We're
It's
gonna.
Wednesday, guys. Naughty Business Live. Thanks for hanging out with us. Come on, let's do it. Let's do it. Hey, I'm
I
gonna
mean,
throw
I
my
felt a
show
lot of
out there.
pressure
Check this out.
today.
So I'm trying to work on TikTok again a little bit on Wednesday because again that's where we started. So I kind of got to be faithful to that. The best of my capabilities because dread. Uh, what did I call it? So the new name is Reptile Nerd Network. Let's get nerdy, dude. I love it. You
How's
look
it
like you're
going?
going on tour with ZZ Top,
Well, I
I'll
can't
count
grow a
that.
beard.
and he's
I,
got the top beard.
I never hit puberty, so.
This
I'm
is
sure you hit a
awesome.
little puberty.
Oh,
I know you
Dave,
barely
what's
have
going
any
on,
chin
man?
hair.
Not a lot. Not a lot.
Hey, thanks for
But
fighting through those technical difficulties. I'm sorry about that platform, but man, you were a trooper. That's
no,
right.
it's no big deal. It's an old laptop. It's an old Apple. I just think there were some security issues with it. That's all.
Right on.
Right
How
on.
are you guys getting cloud and rain up there? You're not far from me, man. You're in what, South Central Missouri?
Yeah, I'm like South Central.
Yep.
Honestly, it's pretty clear out there right now. But I've been in Kansas for the last 3 days, so I don't even know what the weather's been like here.
Oh, I'm sorry. How's Kansas?
It's nice. When pretty much road cruising for 3 days for snakes.
Sweet.
Sweet.
Always worthwhile. So
Yeah, no, did well.
what's going on right now with with vending, and what's the plans for 25, man? What's new this year for you?
Well, we moved into a new facility back in January. Something a little smaller, something off property. We're renting a little place in town. It's about 1,800 square feet. Very happy with the new facility. I've been electrical bills a little high. I've been complaining about it. The city charges a lot for electric. I think my electrical bill my first 3 months there was like $2,000, which was very unexpected. I thought it'd be more in like the $600 or $700 range. But we're gonna make some changes. We're still kind of working the collection out a little bit on what we're wanting to work with long term. All our boa constrictors have pretty much all dropped except for like 2 or 3 off-season litters. I've got about 50 ball python clutches on the ground, about 5 or 6 more I'm waiting to lay. And I had a bunch of girls reabsorb during the move, so I'll have a little bit of a second half there. I got a bunch of baby skinks on the ground. I think we got about 50 babies so far on the year.
Damn.
Colubrid just started laying eggs, so I got a bunch of corn snake eggs. Hopefully, the milk snakes will start laying pretty soon. Hondurans should be laying, I think, pretty soon. And Wooma's got a couple Wooma clutches, hatched good.
Oh,
Everything's looking good on them. I think we had like a 2.7 ratio on the one clutch. Really nice dark animals. And
mm,
probably forgetting something, man. I know I got a baby room full right now, like to the brim.
wow. And see, that's even further than I thought. I mean, you have so much diversity. I didn't realize you had your hand in that high a number of clutches in that many species.
Uh, yeah, no, I don't really show off what I'm doing enough over
In
here. I
full
don't,
swing.
I
I mean, you're in full
don't touch the
swing,
social
dude.
media. No, you're good. Yeah, no, I've been collecting a lot of different stuff for years, and I've worked with stuff where there's a lot of things I just take to the shows and I hardly post online.
Nice.
Um, and like I said, I should really talk about what I'm doing here a lot more. But pretty good year, and we're still working on the sweet spot for ball pythons. I'm sitting on a lot of older projects I've just kind of kept around to keep around.
Yeah.
And we used a lot of that stuff to kind of make some heads for some projects we're looking to move forward with. I'm putting a lot of time into tri-stripe paint and puzzle right now. I do have a lot of head sunset stuff, so we are doing more basics. I haven't really moved forward in that project. I think I've sold all my best sets I've made over the last 4 or 5 years.
Huh. So you've been in Sunset that
Yeah.
long.
Yeah, when I started helping with Ben Rennick's collection, he bought the very first female and het male that was ever sold by Barchek. So when I got there, there was a very large group of pos sets he produced from that male.
Mm,
So it's been me kind of proving out those heads while in the process of that, making more pos sets from the ones that didn't prove out.
yeah.
But I had the head on the one side. But now with genetic testing, I really got to pony up because I got about 40 more females back there that are ready to breed, and I don't know if they're het or not. But a lot of the head stuff for sunsets has markers. In the brown pattern on the back, you get a little bit of blushing in it.
Hmm.
They all have a stripe down their tail, like above their cloaca and down. And there's a couple other markers you can look for until you start putting a lot of codon genes in there. Then it gets a little confusing.
Interesting. Man, I didn't realize that you were so humble and quiet in the game, but then you do so. I mean, your public presence is just out there all the time. I feel like you're just great at the media aspect of it. But you're not even. I just feel like you don't push product. You're just like a great guy to go have a fun and be part of the community. I had no idea you were that much into that many projects. That's incredible. I love. We were both commenting before you got backstage. Your boas are amazing. Tell us
Oh
about your
yeah.
boas, man.
Yeah,
What's the Arby's?
when I started buying what we'll call investment animals, my first big buy was with Tom Burke, and I spent a lot of extra money on a albino because it was a lipstick albino. I think I paid like 1,500 for that when normal albinos were going for about 4 or 500. And then Rich Eiley had some posset for hypo posset albino stuff. I think I bought like 3 of them. One female didn't make it to breeding size, one proved out, one didn't. And that kind of got things rolling. And also about a decade ago, or a little over a decade ago, the Red Rum Project, which is a pastel line in boas, that was another deal where this one guy out in California, Anthony, produced these absolutely amazing looking VPIs. I spent way too much money on a male. I think I put like 5K into the male, and you could just buy a VPI for like $1,000 back then, but I wanted the best one possible. And I used that male to pretty much get me most of the breeding stock I have today in the VPI project. And his offspring have made me a lot of babies for that project. So a lot of what I do is going to be surrounded by the VPIs, but I've got a number of other boa constrictor projects. I have IMG in the mix and almost all the stuff I'm doing right now. And,
Yeah,
I should
it's
have sent you
sweet,
guys
dude.
pictures before we got rolling, but yeah, I've got a lot of
It's
babies I
dadgum
produced this
sweet.
year I
This
can show
jungle
off.
stuff you got rolling is nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like the jungles. I like the labyrinth project. I had a litter of those this year, which I was happy about. I like a little bit of everything, to be honest with you.
I see.
Cool, cool, cool.
Yeah. What's the most challenging of these species? I mean, you've got a breadth of knowledge a lot of people don't necessarily have to compare them. What's the most challenging of them?
Um, Wilma eggs have thrown me for a whirl over the last couple of years because I keep on trying to change my methods. The breeding aspect, the girlfriend does all the pairing all year. She gets me the eggs on the ground. It's just up to me to hatch them. And I've made a couple dumb mistakes the last couple of seasons where this year we avoided all mistakes. Went back to the way we were always doing it. I heard a lot of very unique ways to hatch your Wilma eggs. And I talked to a couple of guys that were having like high 90%, 100% success rate. I tried doing it their way and I had a lot of clutches crash on me. So Wilma eggs, difficult. And you do hear boa breeding can be a little difficult. There's a few like people get their females too big in boas too fast, and typically you get a year or two out of them. A lot of times they can roll on you. That's not
Oh,
100%, but that isn't uncommon. Um, Vin Russo, I talk about the way he's done it for years. He was importing like Guyanas and Surinames back in the 90s, I want to say.
mhm.
And, these are traditionally like those giant boas in the community. And he was having females come in that were actually already gravid. And I want to say they're around like 4 to 6 pounds. So at that point, he started raising his animals slower and smaller and breeding them. So, like this year, a lot of the females that I bred for the first time were females that were about 5 to 7 years old, all virgins. And most of the females went for me on their first time trying. They put their weight back on really fast. You still get really nice sized litters, like 15 to 22. And I think it's just easier on the animal. They do look like they're going to explode right to the very end of like dropping babies, but no, I think they do better smaller and leaner. I always talk about it's a semi arboreal species, and they really shouldn't be obese.
Yeah.
And when you start getting a boa constrictor that's no longer shaped like a loaf of bread, I feel like those are the animals you run into issues with.
Interesting. Yeah, that square musculature, you take a cross section of the body, you look down at that is just a classic healthy appearance in my
Yeah,
opinion.
we've been hearing that consistently with the people that really, know boas like yourself that, so we can educate, pass that along.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've been
excellent.
screaming it for a long time. All the podcasts, I always talk about it. The only thing that's really difficult about that is, where I have a large collection, if it takes me another 2, 3 years to get something to breeding size, it's not really stressful. I'm not really worried about it. If you're just coming in the hobby and you got to sit and stare at these animals for 4 to 6 years before you can breed them, some
Yeah,
people don't have that kind of patience when you first get in.
man, that's a excellent point. Yeah. Myself included. I mean, I've got a Brazilian rainbow boa that's probably 5.5, not quite 6 foot yet, spreading urates, but my male isn't large enough yet, and I won't even try till next year. She's 4, so still on the young side, and everyone says with boas, man, waiting that extra year or two is really worth it, and you just kind of underline that. Interesting.
Yeah. I prefer it, but like I said, it sucks when you're waiting on something brand new you want to work on, and like this year I'm gonna have to invest a little mail or money into my males. I
Mm.
will say I haven't put a lot of money back in the last 4 years, and because of that, there's some really unique stuff going on in the hobby that I want to be a part of. So I'm going to need to get like 3 good males this year, and then I'm going to have to hold back those females for about 5 to 7 years. So by the time I'm 50, I'll have all the animals that everyone's making right now I want to work with.
I feel that. I feel that in my bones. Yeah, absolutely. It's a balance between finding your passion and finding what's marketable. You can't, always chase obviously the current, always the trend, or always what's next to keep up with the Joneses. But there's a happy medium, and that's, I think, tough to do. I mean, I think it's hard to see an eye to the future and stay relevant, and not be hyper invested in the fad, but the longevity of that, like that 5 to 7 years. I mean, that's a car note. That's how long you pay off a whole car. Like that's a while, you know.
It's a chunk of life, man. It's a chunk of life. It's and the nice thing about boas too is where I'm talking about maybe trying to incorporate something a little bit new. Like I said, I work a lot with the VPIs and the black eyed anery, the RDR line, Ralph Davis stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like people have been breeding that into VPIs to make like the Spectre stuff and I believe the carbon stuff. And honestly, those are some of the nicest snows you can buy in the market. And where, the stuff I've been working with is type 1 anery, and a lot of it comes from Frank Martin's Orange Gasm line. I make phenomenal looking snows, but there's just something about those black eyed aneries that I honestly believe is more of an extanthic project that just makes a nicer looking animal. And that black eyed anery has been around for over 20 years, and people just recently started incorporating that into VPI pairings. We all kind of, the norm was that type 1, and we were okay with it. But again, the type or the black eyed anery look is just a very unique looking animal. And that's why I want to play with that a little bit more.
Man, how's the market when you go? How does the public receive you when you go to vend at shows? Do they come seek you out for that boa that they have to have, or because that sounds like what you're producing is above the casual buyer? What do people seek out like in person when they meet you?
Well, there is a balancing act. I do still have deli cup boas, that $120 wild type, up to like 150 on some hypos, jungles, and other pretty combos. But then also, like, I do have a couple animals I produced this year that are in the $4,000 to $6,000 range. So like, I like to take a couple really nice animals because you do want to wow the crowd and you want to like draw some eyes over. And you never really know when there's going to be a big buyer at a show. We did the Nashville Plant and Pet Expo this past weekend,
Yeah.
and I brought one table of animals. I only brought boa constrictors, and I did have a customer that was going to come out and talk to me, and I knew he was going to grab a few things. I brought some other nice animals with. He ended up putting a nice little like 6 animal package together. And that was almost half what I did the entire weekend with that one customer that's an old friend of mine. And as the weekend went on, I did have about 3 or 4 other vendors come over and spend good money on some of the more higher end animals.
Yeah.
And also for the general public, I probably sold another like 5 or 6 animals in that $120 to $300 range.
Excellent.
So yeah, great weekend. There weren't a lot of boas available at this show.
Yep.
I want to say there was probably 3 guys that actually had more than a display case full on their table.
Okay.
And I always make this. It's kind of I don't know if it's a rude thing to say, but when people see things selling on your table, like the drive to buy kind of goes up a little bit. It's a little contagious.
Yes.
So if I have like 3 people around me and we're all talking and one person pulls the trigger, especially if that's an animal one of those other 2 we're looking at,
And
they're
then
almost immediately looking at what else we have to maybe get something else they like.
FOMO sets in.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So I think that helps out a lot. And I'm the same way. I want what I can't have most of the time. I always want the best of the best. I want
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
pick of the litter, pick of the clutch. Um, I will say in the hobby, I've always been willing to spend a little more on the quality breeders I have. And because of that, I think it's put me in a lot better place over the years.
Man, that is true. We hear that time and time again. Not all genes are created equal, right? Like you really.
No,
What's up,
no.
Jen?
And
Bosa. Thanks for rolling through, guys.
yeah. And, the ball python game, I've always enjoyed it. I love the paint jobs, but like, that's a pay to play species. It's
Interesting.
where I
Talk
talk
about
about boas. Yeah. Well, Ball pythons, the thing is, there's always like a new idea, and like new norm is a good way of putting it. Um, DG has always been a beautiful animal. It's been a beautiful animal since the late 90s. It took almost till 2017 before the entire industry said, oh, wow, I need DG in everything now. And where we had a couple really strong years like that, the following norm was, I need DG and hypo in everything. So, like I said, the norm is the best way of putting it, is always changing. But also in the process of that, some of the old classics come back at a higher price. Paint Project's a good example. At one point, paints were $200, $300 on a table, and people weren't buying them. While sunsets were on the table for, I want to say, around two or three at that point. Now, if you go online and you want to get a female paint, they're $1,200. If you want to get a female sunset, I want to say that's an $800 animal right now. So, that's something where the script was flipped. It one all of a sudden became popular. The demand was high, the supply was low, and people who stuck it out in the paint game for a long time are doing very well now. So you don't really know what's going to get popular, but if it's recessive, just know the day is going to come around that the whole industry is going to want it.
That's a really interesting thought to see how it's all like fashion, like stuff comes in cycles. Have you seen that? I mean, you just gave a couple of great examples, but I mean, have you seen that in general, either in the reptile industry or just ball pythons? I mean, that what was cool becomes
Well,
uncool, and then it becomes cool again.
yeah, well, ball pythons especially, whenever there's a new gene, it is cool. And or not everybody, but a lot of people are going to try to get it if they can afford it when it first comes in. But then if they're not happy with the combos,
Mm.
sometimes it kind of fades away. Even clown was kind of unpopular for a while there. We were seeing pastel clowns, pastel lesser clowns. We were seeing banana clowns, pinstripe clowns eventually, but like we weren't really seeing a lot of like really crazy looking animals. So that's why clown was popular, but not super popular, and it came on a little bit later. Puzzle is kind of in that same spot right now where it's a very unique pattern for a recessive, but we were stuck in the pastel game for that a long time, and that's okay because the pastel puzzles are amazing.
They are amazing.
Pastel actually they make the pattern busier, in my opinion, a lot better. Where
Pastel
some of
goes
these other
off.
combos oh yeah, some combos that look really good in clown, like a Pompeii puzzle, might not even be close to what a Pompeii is. You know what I mean? In the
Sure.
clowns, so like you kind of have to learn what the right thing to do with puzzle is, and we're gonna make some bad puzzle combos in the process. But when we get it dialed in and we find those like two or three genes that react in a way consistently to make the pattern perfect, I see a lot more people pushing in the puzzle project in the next like 5 years.
But you just
It's
got to
one of the
stick it out, though. What you're saying, you got to ride that wave as long as you can, because eventually
Yeah,
it could just pay off for you.
hundred
puzzles. One
percent.
gene I
Yeah.
covet in my rack. I don't have any, and it's the one I've gotten. Dred and I work a hypo tri stripe project together. I've got Cypress and other. I got other things that I wanted, but puzzle is one that still has evaded me. That has definitely been hot on my list for 8 months plus, but I just have not pulled the trigger on it. I bought chondros and stuff, and I just haven't bought an animal that level yet for ball pythons. Anyhow.
No, now I know there's a lot of things that are selling for a lot of money in the industry. Monsoon held up for a long time. I've been hearing some big deals in that. There's some other stuff coming up now, but last year, I mean, we don't know the exact price that Brock and those guys sold their Sunset puzzle for, but it was advertised like they got a pretty penny for it. Also, the Chad, he did pastel DG puzzles. That was another animal that was a very large sale for him. Probably one of the bigger sales he's had in the hobby, and that was just this past year.
Mm.
So there are a lot of combos in puzzles right now that are actually going for big money, and where we do still hear there's some great stuff in clowns. You don't hear that giant clown sale like you did just a couple years ago, but they're still happening. But I've been hearing bigger sales in the puzzle stuff.
Yeah, I love what
Yeah.
it does visually. It's one of my favorites for sure.
Yep. Always
For
been a fan. DG and that were always my favorite, but I was spending all my time buying boa constrictors.
Nah. Yeah. So is that kind of
Nice.
where your big passion is? Like, was ball pythons more of like a playground for you because of the genetics and like just the mental challenge and the odds game? Is it like more fun? Where do you find you're more passionate about the boas, or am I incorrect?
No, the boas are my identity in the hobby. People do tie me to ball pythons, and you hear me talk about ball pythons. You think I've been working on them for 20 years. It's more of just obsessed over the hobby for over 20 years, and ball pythons have been the most relevant in the hobby, most relevant thing for 20 years.
Yeah.
The most interesting conversations, some of the bigger sales you hear about. I have a million interesting ball python stories from over the years, but my collection was always 10 or 20 ball pythons. Like I never really overly invested in them. I never really had like an idea what to do with stuff. And again, when Ben passed away and I got the phone call to kind of come out and help with his collection, it was in that moment where I went from again 10 to maybe 20 ball pythons on average to I want to say his facility had about 1,500 animals in it.
Wow.
So it was kind of like, I understood like the process of the idea of mass producing a species. I did a lot of factory work, and I always say my time in factory work, teaching assembly lines and things like that to people, made it to where when I walked into an operation that size, as stressful as it was with everything going on, it wasn't like this impossible thing. Hardest thing about it first year was IDing everything because, my joke was anytime I produced a ball python I couldn't ID, I called Ben Rennick up and he ID'd it for me.
Uh,
So I got into that collection where he was breeding triple quodoms to quad quodoms, and not always like the first year I got there, he only wrote one male on the label for breeding on a female's cage. When you hatched out the clutch, you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. He must have used something else. And now it's a guessing game of what other male out of these hundreds of males did he use for breeding. Um, so first year was kind of tough when it came to identifying. And, there are some things I did over the years in ball pythons, certain pairings I did that were going to be future projects. But I always sold the good stuff. And I hate to say it. Like I never committed to anything super long term. Like there was always somebody who wanted the ingredients I was making, and it was really hard to say no to the sale.
Ain't nothing wrong with that. It wasn't like you were giving up the farm. You were still diversifying. You're still doing your colubrids. You're still doing your boas. Like I, I'm hoping to sell some ball pythons so that I can buy more chondros. Does that make me a criminal? No. Like it's just
Well,
working your diversity, working your, you're opening up different markets by making yourself available with different animals. So who cares if you use one to buy something else and further a project? It still makes you relevant and still gains you
yeah,
experience. That's for damn sure.
100%. And, it sucks. 'Cause I do so many of these podcasts. I'm always a broken record. I've got like certain things I always say, but, if you're coming into this hobby not super knowledgeable how to breed, ball pythons are a very easy species to breed. If you just pay attention to the animals, feed them, and just rotate properly on your males, even people who have no idea what they're doing come in are very successful. And also, when you do come in as a newcomer, whether it's somebody who just wants to play around and maybe spend $1,000 and just kind of mess around with a few pairings, or you want to come in and spend $100,000, you guys will probably both have the same success rate on breeding if you just pay attention. And again, everybody buys into what tier they want to be in. Some people like the pet market, some people like the high end market.
Yeah, interesting. So ball pythons, admittedly, is easy, right? For incubation and success rate. Can you kind of compare and contrast that with the womas? Like, what are the difficulties, the temperatures, the substrate? I mean, I'm familiar with chondros and some of the pitfalls. I have not bred chondros yet. Don't get me wrong, but I'm very much a student, and I'm aware of some of the little things you get away with ball python incubation. Will just take out your whole clutch when it comes to chondros. So I'm aware of some of these differences, but when it comes to womas, why is it more challenging? Like, what can you say about that?
So the biggest issue that people pick, or the biggest problem is humidity being too high. If there's condensation on top of your egg bin, which is not uncommon, if any of those droplets land on your eggs, they can turn bad like fast. They
Okay.
start molding really quick. Like the eggs turn really fast if they're in too high of a humid area.
Hmm.
I've heard people do them a lot of different ways. Like Mike Schultz is right down the road for me. He likes the larger sim box. Some years he'll just use ReptiChip underneath it, have them suspended over. He burps it every once in a while, keeps the condensation wiped off the top, and he gets a good success rate. I've always liked putting them directly in perlite and sometimes a perlite vermiculite mix, but you have to not put too much water in there. Like I said, too much and you can
Really?
kill them almost in the first week or two.
So even
So,
little tricks like propping your egg box so that condensation runs to
well,
one
yeah,
side, or
no. There were old school methods, and a lot of people that talked about that, where they would keep their Wilma containers at an angle and
yeah.
just let gravity do all the work for them. But again, if you make that mistake and any of that water does drip on top, when that one egg starts rotting, they all start rotting because the one.
Oh wow.
So rotting eggs going to bring up your humidity level in there. You're going to get a lot of moisture on the side, which is going to be bad for your eggs in there. And when a rotting egg is touching a good egg, they're so sensitive, they'll start rotting. So I think it's definitely one that I pay a lot of attention to the incubator. I try to only put a little bit of water in with my perlite.
Hmm.
Like, perlite vermiculite mixtures, like a lot of times back in the day, you add water, you kind of clump it up like a snowball, give it a squeeze, and if like a droplet or two comes out, it's perfect. You do
Right.
that for ball pythons, perfect every time. Where with the womas, you almost want it to crumble apart. Like you want it to be moist, but you don't want it to be moist enough to actually really hold the substrate together.
Interesting.
And again, some people suspend above water without any issues, but whatever you're doing, you just got to make sure that water's not really coming in contact with the egg. And if it is, it's just, there's going to be a little moisture in your substrate. A lot of people still even use like a little grate to keep them off the substrate. I've had as much luck with the grate as just putting them right in. But a good example of my one clutch this year, the female rolled 4 eggs out, only had 3 eggs underneath her. Those 4 eggs that were rolled out all went in the incubator. They went bad immediately. The
Sometimes
three
mama
that went in
knows.
there, Mama always knows, and she might have done a number on them. Some I've had ball python eggs rolled out that are still fine, but no, they know they don't waste any energy on something that's not fertile. How they know, I don't know, but they know.
Right. Right.
Um, yeah, and I've even had females push like a slug out like a week before she even pushes her eggs out in boas and in ball pythons. But so like I said, they can be a little sensitive to water. So where I did not think they were that hard to breed, kept feeding them. I wouldn't call it cheating. We do a lot of ultrasounding, and
Yeah.
I do a lot of ultrasounding with a lot of species we work with. Um,
It's not
my
cheating at
collection
all.
doesn't. Yeah, don't be too dependent on it. The animals still have to do their part, but like I'd like to ultrasound the building once a month, year round. If anything doesn't have an egg, like when everyone else is having eggs, or doesn't have a litter when everyone else is having a litter, I get a lot of off-season litters. Where my boas just had like most of their babies, I still have 3 gravid females that are probably about still over a month away, 2 months away, and I have some females that just started breeding about a month ago. So if you have the ultrasound, it cheats a little bit, and with boas, they'll sit at 6 to 10 millimeters for a while. When they get 12 to 15, I find things will start happening really fast. I need to have a male in there. I will sometimes put a male in at 10, but sometimes even at 10 millimeters, the male doesn't even really want to look at the female.
Wow.
And, in all the old literature, it talks about how courtship's a big thing with boa constrictors. I do believe there's a little courtship there, but I've also found that when that female's in that window of, let's say, 15 to 18 millimeters, males will typically try to get on top almost immediately, and I'll have them locked within a couple days. So I think that old literature was really just that courtship was just them being together that maybe encouraged her to start building follicles. And the reason there was a month or 2 months of courtship was he wasn't big enough for him to want to waste his energy on her.
Ah, man, the things they can sense is just mind-boggling, isn't it?
Yeah. Now, their best advice, no matter what species you work with, just pay attention to the body language of your animals, and they'll tell you everything you ever need to know about everything. Where we pay attention to ball pythons wrapping a water dish, when they're developing follicles, they're putting off using so much energy, creating so much heat, they're trying to cool their core down. Boa constrictors will do the same thing. Womas will do the same thing. A lot of species will hug the cool side when they're developing. And almost no matter what species, females, when those follicles are getting big enough, will lean on their side to relieve the pressure that those follicles are putting on their organs. So pay attention to your animal's body language. You'll know when to breed them. You'll know when to feed them. You'll know everything. But when you have a larger collection and where, yes, we do check and everything a few times a week, the ultrasound really does come in handy so we don't miss windows.
Yeah. Yes. Your collection is way larger than I understood. So yeah, it makes perfect sense. How long ago did you start ultrasounding, man?
Well, honestly, when I started working with Rennick stuff, I almost immediately got an ultrasound because I went from a few animals to a lot of animals.
Right.
So probably around 2017 is the first time I started this. By the way,
Okay.
sorry, I'm putting this dog on a leash. But yeah, right around there is probably when I started in 17. And then I've always kind of kept up with it since then. Even when I did my boas back in the day, I was kind of more on that seasonal. And, Tracy Barker and a lot of other guys or a lot of other people in the hobby will talk about food cycling,
Yep.
stimulating the wet season and the dry season. Taking your boas off food for a couple months when it's supposed to be the dry season, then make food plentiful, and typically they start building, typically they start breeding. So there's a lot of people that will manipulate their animals with a food cycle, and I've done that over the years successfully, and I know a lot of other guys that still do that today. I do that a little bit, but most of it, I just kind of feed them every other week, sometimes every 3 weeks. And when I start seeing follicle development, I'll up the meals a little bit and I'll start incorporating a male into the pairings. And that's for about every species I work with.
Hmm. So you've just cut and dried. Just you've got it down with enough observation to where, I mean, that's cool. That I think gives peace of mind to. I mean, even just people starting out like, oh, what signs can I miss? And then here you are. This is almost a universal type of a guidepost. So that's interesting. What about ones that brewmate? I mean, is there any difference with your colubrids?
Oh, yeah. So the northern blue tongue skinks and all the colubrids all go down around the same time, usually around Thanksgiving. I'm going to start cooling, sometimes a little earlier. And normally around like the first of the year to the 15th of January, I'm going to start bringing at least the blue tongue skinks up and getting them ready to start locking. The colubrids sometimes where I'll bring so this year we moved in the middle of cool down. And we actually moved the colubrids and the skinks to the new building like late December.
Mm-hmm.
And where I turned the heat on for the colubrids, thinking, hey, I must have woke them up, better get them going. I had the back of the rack at 82, and every single colubrid was pressed at the front where it was 78 degrees because they weren't ready to wake up yet. The blue
Ah.
tongue skink on the other part, though, when I got to the new place, started pacing in their cages. They were ready to go. So I started locking my blue tongues about 3 weeks earlier this year, and I got my litters this year 3 weeks earlier than any year I've done before. So they didn't really give me a choice. They woke up, I had to breed them, but the colubrids, I let them chill. I actually turned off their heat for a while. Then I turned it back on about a month later, started offering them meals. And then I started noticing they were going back and forth in the cage, some on the cool side, some on the hot side. And then we started heavily breeding.
Hmm. Man. So how long ago did you get into this as a hobby, just as a person, like as far as an interest for you?
Reptiles, as long as I could catch them. But
Yeah.
I learned about the breeding industry back in like 2002, right after I graduated high school.
Yeah.
There was a local pet store called Markheim's in Buffalo, New York. And a gentleman who worked there on the weekends, his name was Ken Leach, and he worked with Kenyan sand boas.
Mm.
I came in the pet store a bunch of times. I started buying like Brazilian rainbows for like $350. I was buying Amazon tree bows for like $150, $200 just because they
Ah.
had these, they were there and I liked them. Then I learned about the shows. I started going to the Cleveland show, the Columbus show, which they had once a month. I started going to the White Plains show, which they did every like 4 months back then. And occasionally I get out to like the Hamburg show. really at that point, I was kind of like working factory jobs, not making a lot of money, but I was saving every penny of it. And when I had a few paychecks, right, a few extra $100, I go to a show and I'd spend it all that weekend. Bought a lot of very random stuff. I bought a pair of almost everything. And boas, I bought my first boa when I was 8 years old. So boas have always really been that species I've really appreciated as a reptile keeper. So when I started like looking at this like collection I was building with like no rhyme or reason, I then started selling things off and kind of reset. And around like 2005, I started producing boa constrictors.
Oh, 05. So that's 20 years now. Okay. How is the White
Yeah.
Plains show, man? Like that's one that's so far out there. Not many people get to go to it. I know Charlie of Shed Testing has one of our sponsors. Thanks, Charlie. But I don't hear of a lot of people that go there. How is White Plains? What's the vibe? What's the size?
White Plains was huge. In the state of New York, it was probably is the biggest show in New York.
Oh yeah.
That was a long running show. I don't remember Bruce's last name. I believe Bruce had that running for years. Now I do know that he did pass away within the last couple of years, and I do think there was a gap on those shows. I haven't kept an eye on those schedules in about 5 or 6 years. But back in the day, like there was a real tiny little Buffalo show. Cleveland was a nice size show. Columbus was a little bigger. That was bigger than Cleveland. White Plains was another beast, and you had guys like Kevin McCurley set up back in like the early 2000s, mid 2000s. Yeah, guys like Jeremy Stone flying out for that show. You had all the big breeders in the East Coast trying to do that show, especially the Northeast. And yeah, everything was there. I loved the show. I never had enough money when I went to that show, but created a lot of really good relationships back then. Rob Christian used to come and walk that show back when he was younger. He'd bring out cupcakes with a slice of bacon on the top. There was a lot of people that I still talk to today that I used to see at those shows. Even the Long Island show back then, like it was like early teens, like Dave Palumbo came out before Dave Palumbo was really Dave Palumbo in this hobby. He's always been popular in the bodybuilder aspect of that
Yes.
industry, but like the reptile thing, like he was starting to do his videos, starting to get things rolling. Always enjoy talking to him when I run into him, and again in Long Island. But Chris Eaton, another guy, I used to see him at all the shows in the Northeast back in the day.
Yeah, he's
Had
cool.
that relationship start very early. No, it was a blast of a show. I loved going out there for that.
That's cool. Dred is out in SoCal, and so he goes to Pomona, which see, I'm right outside Memphis, not far from you. So those
Yeah,
far corners are really far. I'm going to go to Daytona. That's a 13-hour drive. That's at least manageable. The other ones are way, way further. And so I
yeah,
always want to hear, shows that I have not had a chance to step foot into. So Dred brought me some cool insights at Pomona. It was pretty cool there. And then KG show out in LA. That was fun. He went to that as well. So yeah, I haven't ever got a chance to hear about how White Plains was. I know it's old. I know it's been around. I mean, it's like I feel like it's like Tinley, like in my memory. It's been around a long, long time. So I knew it had to be
yeah.
epic.
Now, big facility, and it was a 1 day show, and they
Oh,
used to have it only like 3 times a year. So you get in there, and everything happens fast. Everybody does their purchases quick, and they get the fuck out of there.
dude, that must have been
Um,
so rad. Like as if you were vending. How just that vibe of just the buzzing at the table and doing deals and just being done and over. That must be a great day.
Yeah, no, things move fast at that show. I think the only thing that started affecting that show a little later on was they added more shows. Where it used to be, I want to say 3, maybe 4 shows a year back in the day. I think it got all the way up to like 6 to 7 a year.
Oh
And
yeah.
I think the only thing that really hurt that, in my opinion, was it took the urgency off the table for the buyer. People would come to your table and it would be like, well, if you still have it in 2 months, maybe I'll get it then. Whereas
Right.
before, when there was like a 4 month gap in between shows, people went there, they saved ahead of time, and they spent their money. Um, so more shows in that area, and that'll go for any area. When
Yep.
it becomes a little oversaturated, you almost have to do every one of those shows, whether it's 5 or 6 a year compared to the 2 or 3 before that, to make the same amount of money you made when it was only 2 or 3 shows. And that's
Wow.
not always the case, but that's what I found with some of those areas that started expanding on shows.
That makes sense. Yeah, and there's only so many, hatchlings, or litters at certain times of the year, generally speaking. So the stock that's going to show up to be on the table is going to get stale. I mean, if you're someone I can go to it within an hour or two, and I go to every one, I'm seeing the same snake on a table over and over, and then I'm not as inclined to go the next time. And I could miss out, but I feel like the seller is missing out too because, yeah, oversaturation is, I think, the perfect word. You said 3 a year was a sweet spot for them.
Well, I would assume so. I was there when they started expanding more, and I did a few of the shows. And one tough thing too for a vendor in the Northeast, especially before there was really like an online presence or anything like that, people in the Northeast didn't buy from you if they didn't know you. So like Hamburg and White Plains were two good examples where you almost had to go out for like 2 or 3 shows, almost like put in a year of work
Ah,
before you really even start establishing a customer base. And even the Hamburg show back in the day, I would go out there and I might have some like short tail pythons on my table and some rainbow boas. And, I get with Junior from JMG Reptiles and he might give me some hognose and some leopard geckos and fat tails. And then I had my boas and my ball pythons and whatever else. And I went 2 or 3 shows where I didn't sell a single animal.
oof.
And it had nothing to do with my price point. It had nothing to do with the quality of the animal on my table. I was an unfamiliar face in the Northeast in a long running show, and it took a long time for anybody who was willing to buy from me.
Hmm. So that's a really good regional observation. But I think you touched on some, and I feel like some of the people I see in the chat, friends of ours, and myself and Dred included, like as someone new that's going and like you're starting to vend. If you went to 2 or 3 shows in a row and didn't sell an animal, what internal intestinal fortitude kept you going? What made you go, "Oh, I'm just gonna throw in the towel"? Shit, this is crazy. I'm done. I have bred all the wrong things. No one wants my animals. I mean, hindsight's 2020. You're looking back and you say, "Well, it's a regional thing. They want to get to know you in the network." But what if you were like down here, Jacksonville, Arkansas, where I met you the first time? Bought my first ball python from my daughter there. I didn't know who
Yeah.
you were then, and I bought that animal and so you go to that show and don't sell something for 2 or 3, and that's your only local show. Like, how can someone see through the end of that and not give up?
Um. Well, how about this? So let's go back to our first encounter. Why did you work with me to buy an animal if you didn't know who I was?
I like the appearance of the animals on the table and the price point, and I was not aspiring to be a ball python breeder. It was a pet for my daughter, so the price point. I mean, I think it was a whopping $30. It was a pastel het clown, and it
Yeah.
was like a Sunday. And I think you spent all your time with other people that spent more than $30, and I was really wounded for a long time, Dave. No, I'm kidding.
He did.
Okay.
He cried for a
Wow.
while.
No, I loved
That's
it. It
fair.
was
But
our
I
first.
did put time in with you.
No, yo, God, yeah. I remember us. You were explaining some of the hets and like what the differences were. I didn't know anything about it back then. I hadn't paid any attention to ball pythons at all, and so that was my first experience with it. And I bought it because your animals. You had a big presentation. You had the U at the end of the aisle. It was bigger than any other vendors, and you were approachable, and the animals were attractive. And that's really why you stood out from the whole show at that little bitty, Jacksonville's rinky dink. And so that was great
Yeah.
presentation, and you were still approachable. You were still you had time for everybody, and I that's really I think the customer service aspect that I took away from that interaction.
So if you're doing a couple shows and you're a couple shows in and people aren't buying from you, go from the top to bottom. Presentation of the animals on the table. I keep everything on white. It always looks very clean that way. If anything uses the bathroom, I try to get it cleaned almost immediately.
Mm-hmm.
I try to make sure the displays are wiped off. I want presentation to be good because I don't want the presentation to scare people away. Price points. A lot of times I'll walk a show ahead of time. I'll look around, see what other vendors are selling for, try to stay competitive. And even if my prices are a little bit higher at a show, I always let people know, if you want to work with me, but you see an animal on another table that the price point's better, at least give me a chance to match. So that's another conversation I'll have with people if I do a lot of shows and I'm not constantly trying to change the numbers on my display cases. And then, of course, the third thing is customer service. If you're not putting time into people at your table, especially people who don't know what they're doing, don't know about the original, like a setup, we would have talked about setup. We would have talked about hot and cool gradients in the cage. We would have talked about hide boxes.
We
We would
did.
have talked about body language of the animal. Like, give people a little confidence in something that maybe they don't have confidence in.
Mm.
So I hate to say it, sales is not easy for some people. Some people don't have the personality for it. There's some people don't feel comfortable talking to people, and a lot of times you kind of have to figure out what your sales pitch is and what it is going to be about you that's going to make people want to work with you. And where I have my techniques that I do that work for me, and I try to pass on to other people, you kind of have to find like your own way. You got to customize your sales technique. But don't be afraid to pay attention to what people are doing around you. But back in the day, you used to be able to sit behind a table and the animals sold themselves because you go to a show and maybe one guy way back he'd be the only guy with pinstripes. You'd have to buy a pinstripe from him.
Mm-hmm.
If you wanted a dreamsicle back in like 2003 or four, you were buying it from Ralph Davis. Whether you like to buy from him or anybody else, like you had to buy from Ralph Davis. Soul Suckers on Nerd's Table back in that day. He was the only guy with Soul Suckers. Like, it was a little different to where now everybody has almost the same thing on their tables a lot of
Yeah.
times.
You,
And
you
sometimes
got
the
you
animals
got to
aren't going to
you
set you apart.
even as a new
Oh,
vendor. I vended my first show, okay, this year, a new vendor, and nobody knows me around here, right? Just a few people, just friends. Well, you got to think outside the box, and you got to stand out. Well, we stood out. We moved
Yeah.
35 animals in 2 days, and everybody was like, "What the freak? Where'd y'all come from?" Well, we don't
Yeah.
sit back like this and be quiet, right? We Vegased it up. I mean, I'm hooting and hollering, carrying on. Woo! Come over here, check this, right? We brought them, and it worked out for
Yeah.
us. And we did a few raffles and some stuff like that, right? We made it fun and had that interaction
Yeah.
like you're saying, and still spent time, with that customer explaining setups and the animal and why you do this and do that, or they show up with probably not the right setup. Well, let's help you what you can do to modify that setup to make it work for that animal. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
absolutely right on that.
No. And so I talked to Darian with Morph Market a good bit, or at least whenever we have time to talk. And he recently hit me up and he essentially said, "How are you selling at a higher percentage than everybody else on Morph Market?" Like, and I think it recently, I think I'm allowed to say the numbers now because I think he did a podcast with Brian Carter recently. Because I talked to Carter over the weekend and he said that Darian brought it up that I want to say my close rate for messages coming in on Morph Market is 94% right now. On average, site wide, I want to say it's a 45% average site wide.
dang.
So I think at one point I'm closing 4.5 emails out of 5 emails. Um, a lot of reasons. Combinations of utilizing tools on the website. I utilize the sales when I realize we have to use a sale. When it comes to our response time, the moment that phone buzzes, there's a response.
Huh.
And the response isn't always from me. A lot of times the girlfriend is helping with these responses and honestly doing a lot of the heavy lifting with that. But she's seen the stuff I write to customers. She's read these messages. She understands the things to say to at least create a comfort in that sale. And then we go from there. So like, when Darian brought that up, I was even laughing. I was like, it's not even me closing. I taught her how to do sales. I taught her how to deal with customers, and she's doing a lot of that for me. When it comes to the higher end BOA guys, the guys that are asking certain questions, wanting certain pictures, I'm always jumping in on those conversations. But for the general right now, like she's doing a lot of the heavy lifting for me, and she's just mimicking the stuff that I do normally.
Keep it going. So
That's
the
awesome.
customers have an expectation, of professionalism dealing with you guys. I mean, it sounds like I guess there's lessons everybody can learn along the way, but I think the thing that stuck out to me most was your instant response when you hear an inquiry come in on an animal. That's one thing that really stood out to me that I don't think I've heard anybody really mention before. So that's very cool.
Oh, well, think about it. Um, think about when you first got in the hobby and maybe you started buying on King Snake or maybe you started buying on Morph Market, depending on when you got in. You didn't just look at
Fauna
one
class.
ad and send one email. You probably sent like 6 or 7 emails, and you probably only had $300 to your name. And when the first guy got back and you completed the deal, the other 4 guys were shit out of luck.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happens on Morph Market. I think people send a lot of inquiries. Like sometimes one person will inquire on 5 of my animals, and then they realize they're emailing the same guy 5 times on 5 different animals because they're just looking at things they like and they're just emailing people.
Yeah.
So that fast response time is going to give you the advantage on closing that deal over somebody who might wait hours or sometimes even a day to get back to a customer.
That is a key point. Very key. Yeah, and I've sold animals on there. I've vended before, but I've not had a plethora of animals to warrant that much juggling as far as Morph Market goes. So that's a very good takeaway. When you got into the more public podcast, I mean, you consider yourself a teacher, I would hope, right? I mean, with this experience and the various species, how did you get into the podcasting with MJ? And were you already doing stuff on your own? You guys said, hey, how about how did you get into hosting as much as you do, I guess, in general? And by default, a teacher.
Um, well, honestly, okay. So the start all started because you guys remember Forrest Fanning?
Say again?
Cold Blooded Cafe, Forrest,
Yeah.
Desiree.
Yeah. Okay.
So Forrest was an old friend of mine. We started hanging out in the North Carolina days. Like we knew each other for over a decade plus. And he started doing, I think it was the Unfiltered podcast with MJ. And I didn't even know who MJ was at that point. Me and Forrest would sit on the phone for hours, and he would always say, "Man, you'd be really good for this space." I didn't know shit about the space. I had never even watched a Joe Rogan podcast at that point. Like, I never listened to podcasts.
Right.
Um, he told me to come on. Me, him, and MJ did about, and Steve was there also, Kush. I want to say it was like a 3.5 hour podcast where it was just really me and him debating about everything hobby. Had a lot of fun with it. I think I decked myself out in an American jacket and like some headbands and whatever else because I always enjoy to be a little silly with it. And we had a great time. And essentially, what happened after that was Benjamin and Ryan with R&B Reptiles.
Mm-hmm.
They hit me up and said, "Do you want to maybe do a podcast with us every week?" And that started House Rock. We probably did about 40 or 50 episodes over the course of about 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Every week we tried to do a different species, and a lot of times it was me trying to have first time conversations with people because I genuinely wanted to learn about the species.
This sounds eerily familiar. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, yeah. So we did that, and we did that through about early 2001. And to be honest, my father got sick in December of 2020, and it was like 7 months of taking care of him until he passed away. It kind of it was hard to go on there and want to be happy.
Right.
So I took about a 5 month hiatus, maybe 6 month hiatus, maybe longer, it might have been a year. And over that time, Ryan was married, had a kid on the way. He was changing what he was doing in life. I didn't mean Ryan, I meant to say Benjamin. Ryan had stuff going on with work that was changing, and the podcast just kind of ended. I think our last episode ever was with Brian Potter. And it popped up on my memories yesterday. That was exactly 4 years ago. So after that, I was just kind of out there not doing anything. And MJ hit me up, asked me if I wanted to come on and maybe do a few podcasts with them. We did a couple unfiltered, and then eventually it turned into the Thursday night show on Trap Talk. We continued that for probably about a year or so, maybe 2. And at that point, I ended up taking another small break. Just it gets busy around here. As much as I enjoy this, I feel guilty putting time into this when I'm not putting into the animals.
Yeah.
So we took a little break. I thought I was going to maybe start my own channel. Didn't do anything with it. And then he said if I wanted to do a Friday show every other week on his network, jump in and start doing my own thing and just have fun. So I jump back in. Every other week when I'm not doing it, Junior from JMG Reptiles is, and he's a guy I've learned a lot from in the hobby and talked to more than most people. So me and him have like a really good chemistry together. So I have my week, I do my thing, and then the next week, me and him do our thing. He's taking a little bit of break right now. He's trying to get some social media stuff built up himself. So I'll be taking over his Friday slot on top of my Friday slot. And his slot is for colubrids, and I'm going to try to keep it colubrids until he comes back.
Very cool. Okay, right on.
Awesome.
Man, so you've been
Yeah.
hustling in the public space for 4 or 5 years. 5 years. I mean, that's why. I mean, I didn't know. Again, this is super interesting tonight because I only knew the fringes of how in depth your career has gone and how many people you've affected. Have you ever taken have you ever mentored anybody deliberately, like besides the usual customer service
Oh,
aspect? Have you spent time has anyone growing under your wing over these years?
yeah. I think I'm getting to that point now where like I've been in the hobby long enough where we had a conversation with Craig Trumbauer where he was talking about a guy that he just gave an animal to like maybe decades before that showed up at a show as like an adult and said, I came by your table as a kid and I couldn't afford an animal and you just gave it to me. And then he talked about the career path he took and all this other stuff. I'm starting to get to that point now. I've been in the hobby so long. I am starting to get younger kids and, talking about how they still have the same animal and they're doing this now and they're doing that now. So, I'm getting those, which is really awesome. And when it comes to breeding, I've always been very pro boa constrictor. And I think sometimes that energy I give off and excitement of the boa stuff makes other people in the hobby that may not have considered working with boas get into boa constrictors. They don't always buy them from me, and I always tell them, you don't have to buy from me, but at least let me steer you in the right direction. And then when it comes to Josh with Ball Shed got some boa constrictors from me, and every fall I'm all like, "Have you ultrasounded yet?" And he's like, "No," and I'm like, "You got a fucking ultrasound, man. What are you doing?" And then 2 months go by and I hit him up and I was like, "Have you done it? Are they pairing? Are you locking?" And he's like, "No, I haven't done this yet." And he's like, "I've been busy." And it's like, do it. Fucking do it, man. Like I'm talking to you right now. Do your ultrasound. I got things ovulating over here. So I got a lot of people that I try to help out any way I can. If they message me, I'll help them. They'll send me pictures if they need help IDing in clutches, litter, so on and so forth. So I just enjoy the hobby. I enjoy talking hobby.
Yeah,
So I'm whether it's a new person or somebody who's been here for a long time, if they want to talk hobby with me, I'll talk. And, where I'm learning off of them, hopefully I can contribute a little bit too. But, some of the stuff I learned myself and a lot of other things I learned just from having great conversations with people in the hobby.
great. Yeah, that is so true. I know Dredd and I have learned a ton from hanging out with people from TikTok, on here, at expos. Just and also just observing, and even just something as simple as paying attention to people who's relevant. They're no matter this reptile species, but just their content on Instagram and reading the whole caption. You need to slowly, oh, this gene looks like that. Oh, they did this. I love the way that looks. How can I, what do I have on my rack that can work that way? And if you really love it, I feel like the learning's osmotic all day, every day. You're watching this podcast, you're reading this article. You know what I mean? You're on Morph Market in the calculator. The learning never stops, and so that's cool. I mean, you got a really full plate. I mean, is there anything new on the horizon that you could see? You got a new facility as of January. Sounds mostly
Yeah.
dialed in, right? If I understand. Podcasts are rocking. You're taking an extra slot, at least for a little while on Fridays. Now, if there's a room, I mean, do you see anything new or anything changing? Or are you just in a really good spot right now? Maintain course and keep rocking.
Um, I think there's going to be a lot of changes this year. Like I said, I've fallen behind in ball pythons. I'm trying to produce something now to try to get myself caught back up again, in my opinion. So my ball python collection is going to change drastically. And also, like the conditions of my new building, I want to get that electrical bill down. I may have to set up the back of the building with the colubrids. Where right now I got the bows and the ball python, so I might try to downsize those guys enough to where I can move to the front of the building. get all my colubrids to the back, and I think that'll save my energy bill. And because of that, I may only have I have like 400 ball pythons, which really is a lot of animals. That number might be 200 by the fall, and then it might go back up again. It might go down a little bit from there, but I'm going to try to make more room to expand on some colubrid projects. I have, it's going to sound like an insane number, but I think I have like 30 female boas I held back 5 years ago that are all going to need to be upgraded in the next 6 months. All going to probably go into breeding this fall, maybe. Maybe half of them will if I kind of decide to like hold off on a few. So there's going to be some changes on the equipment I'm going to need to get. And I always talk about it. I've always really loved the colubrid market. I've always thought it was a very safe market. It's really good for export. I've always sent a lot to the Asian market over the years. A lot of the colubrids I produce don't even get sold stateside. A lot of times they literally all go overseas.
Really?
So that's something I do want to expand on a little bit more. And I'm making Kenyan sambos for the first time ever this year. And if I'm successful, I'll probably go out and spend money on some nicer stuff. I'm probably forgetting things, to be honest with you. We do Angolan pythons. I think we bought some. No, we haven't got the scrubs yet, but we got. Yeah, the girlfriend. She came with Angolans, and she does all the work, and she's been successful every year for the past like 3 years. She's been successful enough to where now when we see a nice Angolan at the show, we're going out and getting new animals. I don't like to go too big with a species if I can't prove I can do it. So sometimes I'll just go out and get like some more basic stuff, have a good breeding season, and if I want to kind of like, I would say, be a little Jewish about it, a little cheap, I'll let that species fund itself, and I'll use the money from that species to buy more of that species. And I've done that for a long time. Like the blue tongue skinks, I think we have about 80, maybe 90 animals. And that all started from one female I bought at a Myrtle Beach show like 13 years ago. And, Barchek got really into him back in like 2014 or 15 when he went over to Australia and he got to see Joe Ball's collection. He came back, started talking about him on snake bites. The market exploded. Everybody wanted blue tongue skinks overnight, and animals that I had been selling for $80 to $120, $150. All of a sudden, we were selling for $300 to $450.
Yep.
Because the demand was high and the supply was low. So that was at that point. I had already loved the species. I was able to then justify spending a ton of money on really nice animals from other breeders I like in the industry, and overnight the collection grew. But if it wasn't for him not going over there and making people excited about that species, I may still only have 10 or 20 of them. But I grew to what my market was. And I always say, like, organically grow into what you're doing. You could go out and get green tree pythons, start working with green tree pythons, but that is a very unique community. Whether we're even talking the high end, mid range, or low range, just because you come in with that animal, it doesn't mean guys in that community are going to want to spend with you right away. Rosy bow community is another good example. Gray bandits are another good example. Like, those are communities that, it's not that they're not so much welcoming, but, there's rules in those communities. Where those animals were collected originally, the background in your chondro stuff goes a very long way. You can't really jump into some of these communities and just expect to do well. So don't go in and buy 10 or 20 of these animals. Buy a couple and grow within that community to where people get used to you for the animals. Don't produce more than you can sell.
Yeah. That's really true, and I've seen that before, and I've seen them kind of lambaste it in private like Patreon groups and stuff, and rightfully so. Like somebody shows up on Morph Market out of nowhere with this killer animal, and it's a $20,000-$30,000 animal or something, and it may be worth roundabouts that, give or take some, but it's like, who's gonna trust you? Like unless you've been selling $500 and $5,000, and people have been seeing your social media is, oh, well, he's been building this massive sunset het whatever collection. Now I can see he's been working. How do you just show up with 0 reviews, 0 animals sold, and nobody? You don't have it. How do you? I mean, you're never going to sell a $20,000 or $30,000 ball python, though that animal's worth it. As far as the description goes. But you're right. Until you build up a reputation, you almost have to be more of a people person. You have to be as much of a people person as you are a reptile person nowadays. Very different from the 90s. Like when I first got into reptiles, it was all imports, and breeders were, these mysterious people in the back alley. You never got to meet them or see them. They were the all knowing. And now it's so much more personable, and social media allows you to interact with these folks. And if you are an asshole, or your reputation's everything now, and it counts in a lot of small ways that adds up to a big picture, I think.
No, 100%. And two people that I found to be very unique, Brittany Gobble and JP up in Canada, ball python breeder.
Okay.
Those guys started working on their social media and their videos and everything before they had ever even bred an animal. And Brittany Gobble's following was there for her creating her company. It was people around her that almost lived vicariously in those buys she was making before she even started breeding those animals. And again, JP came in, was buying a lot of animals from very high end ball python breeders. And before he had even bred a ball python, I think he had a larger social media following than I did. Some people, and not everybody has the ability to do that, but people on the outside looking in want to be part of your experience. And again, people love to watch the building process. They love that unboxing. They want to see what you're doing. And like I said, living vicariously in that breeder when you don't have what they have. So those are two good examples of people that came in and before they even bred an animal were very, very popular, more popular than people that have been doing it for 20 years, at least when it came to social media presence.
Multifaceted, man. We touched on how vending in person, your networking, and the reason of genetics matter. Not every animal is equal. We touched on that briefly, but then the social media aspect. I mean, it's really, you got to be firing on all cylinders, I guess, to be successful and relevant nowadays. Because there's some people that I feel like their creations are just Juan of Windy City Morphs. Man, I love what that guy does. He just makes some stunner, just amazing animals. And every day I like watching his content on IG. And it's just, sometimes you just look at people, and whether they're Justin, or they're just someone that you see at every time you go to the local reptile show. I think inspiration can kind of come from everywhere. And I didn't know that about the blue tongue skinks. I mean, I was familiar with them, but that's interesting how you got inspiration, and then look what blue tongue skinks became for you. So you never know where the next little bit of oomph will come from. I didn't realize blue tongue skinks were as popular as they were until I looked in the last few months. Had no idea.
Yeah, no, that part of the industry has been a little bit of a roller coaster. Um, you know, a lot of people got into blue tongues, like I said, about 7, 8 years ago, and the industry got too big for its britches when it came to that part of the industry, in my opinion. Um, we talked about the supply and demand. There was a point in blue tongues where like Bill Brandt was buying them by the hundreds, Barczyk was buying by the 10 lots of hundreds. I was running around buying everything I could. Like you'd wake up at 7 a.m. and open up Fauna and King Snake. And
Yeah.
if you didn't notice an ad in the first 20 or 30 minutes, these animals were selling because they had been in the hobby for 20 plus years, but they just weren't available. Like you had guys like Ray Gerge and James Fenn, East Coast, West Coast guys, early in the game, collections, always had things for sale, but there was never enough. There was enough for what the hobby needed. And that's why they were a $120 animal. But again, when Barczyk started talking about it, you had all these new people come in and start buying all at the same time. And everyone was like, oh, this is going to be the next big thing. There was an overinflation in price because a few guys and literally just a few people buying everything available. And then everybody started producing, and then those prices started leveling out. Like a normal northern blue tongue sink is about $250.
Yep.
And I think that is a very fair price for a very nice pet, even if you want to consider using it as a breeder. And then like you have Alex over at Blazing Blue Tongues who's doing really beautiful orange stuff, and he's got great red lineage. Cheryl Matula, a lot of dark lineage, yellow lineage, orange lineage, red lineage. Very similar lineage to the stuff I'm working on over here. And then you have guys that, were doing great things 5 years ago when the boom happened. They were doing it for 20 years that are hardly producing today. So, that industry's really been all over the place. I've always just stayed very steady in it. But, sometimes some things just blow up. And as fast as they blow up, there could be variables that make them come back down again.
Yeah. Different species, but maybe you might know with your finger on the pulse of that particular part of the industry. What about monkey tail skinks, prehensile tail skinks? Did they get banned, or is there any captive breeding going? I mean, those and blue tongues were coming in as imports when I got into this, working at a big reptile shop in St. Louis, like 93, 94. And those things, we had those as adults, and I think blue tongues for back then were around 200 a piece, and the monkey tails were about 500, 600 each. Much more scarce, but are those around at all in the hobby?
So there's actually a few guys that are actually doing really good stuff with them. I have actually done a couple of podcasts. I got to get better with names. Sometimes I forget names, but the reason you see those prices go over is import export. Those animals were imported for years, and they were, like you said, $400 or $500. And this is a species that is having like one or two babies at a time.
Yeah.
And then they banned exporting out of these areas because too many animals were taken out of the wild. And when that happened, you saw that price go up. I think $1,200.
Yep.
I think maybe even $1,500 on some occasions.
Okay.
And I don't know exactly where that market leveled out now, but a lot of the price on that was literally dictated by import export. And I don't know if we're getting them in the country right now. I always hear sometimes they find another island near the islands that has a population on it and they start exporting them out again. But I don't know for sure on where that one stands, but that is a good captive bred stuff you can work with. There are captive bred animals in the United States. And I wish I could throw a couple names at you. They're going to hate me because I know Jay's watching this podcast right now. But, there's people out there doing it. But there's also not a lot of people out there doing it.
I guess it's got to be
But the demand is,
right? Like the people that buy them seek them out on purpose. It isn't someone that's going to stumble into Petco and be like, "Oh, I'm going to give me a pet today." That's not your monkey tail skink buyer. It's a very specific person.
You will never see a monkey tail in Petco or PetSmart because I don't think anybody will be able to produce enough. But when they were imported in higher numbers, you saw them at some pet stores because they were on the import list. I can't say exactly who was doing it back then, but whether it was Outback or one of the other many importers, if it was on the list, you had an opportunity to buy it, you could put it in your pet store. Reptiles by Mac price list is another good example for that. But
do you mess with?
Yeah, no, like I said,
yourself. I mean, do you bring in new blood?
I don't really mess with imports because I can't get northern blue tongues in. If there was a new mutation in a boa constrictor out of the wild and an opportunity to buy where I actually got the phone call first, I wouldn't hesitate. Ball pythons, who needs to mess with imports at this point? There's so many in the hobby, and all the clubrids that I work with at this point, it's not like people are collecting corn snakes in the wild anymore. I never really, it's not that I'm opposed to it. It's just not something I've ever been a part of.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, I've always been fascinated by it. I've had the price list. I know a lot of people in it. And if, like I said, I'm sure there's some imported animals I've got over the years, but a lot of stuff I work with is captive bred.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I was curious, especially since you're across so many different species. That's one thing I was just wondering. And everyone's got different
how about
opinions.
this? I really want to expand on colubrids. And I know there's certain states that you can get a collector's permit. And, I've thought how cool would it be to, like, I was just in Kansas finding bull snakes all weekend.
Yeah.
Orange striped garter snakes. I really like stuff like speckled kings.
Yep.
There's a part of me that if I can legally collect maybe a pair from like Kansas, I could have Kansas bull snakes. A certain county is known for certain animals. It'd be cool if I had those animals from that county for the industry. Apalachicola king snakes, very rare. I just went to Apalachicola to go herping, and then a week later I found out a buddy of mine works with those. Now I kind of want to buy babies from them just because I was out there looking for them and didn't find them.
Yeah.
Not to collect them, I just wanted to simply see it. But like, my interest gets piqued on a lot of things colubrid, and I do like a lot of the North American colubrid species. I may in the future, in some of these states where you can have permits to collect, I may go to a few different states to collect a few of the same species just for the variability in color.
Yeah, yeah. That's cool. I don't think again, man, Dave, you've got so many new concepts tonight. I mean, that's like the fifth thing that I think that's come out of your mouth that I have not heard other people say in the last year of a weekly podcast. Like you're blowing my mind with some of these ideas, but it makes perfect sense. And it seems like it's in your wheelhouse as far as, what is genuinely your passion and what you're interested in. That's very cool. It's very cool.
It is always changing though, man. I'll be
Yeah.
honest. I get excited about new things all the time. If I had
Squirrel.
unlimited fun, yeah, it'd be bad.
It would.
My truck looks like shit. I live in a very small house. Not even a house. It's like half a metal building. Behind me is a guy's shop.
That's what
Like,
I would
yeah,
love that.
I live very modest, but I put all my money back into the hobby almost always. Whether it's caging, new animals,
Yeah, for
you
sure.
know, it it's a very addicting hobby.
For sure. Man. I guess we lost Dredd. I don't know if he had a technical difficulty. He's in California. They might have had an earthquake or something. I don't know. Call your
Something
people.
like that might have slipped in the ocean. Who knows?
Right? Call your people out there. Make sure everyone's okay. Dude, it's been a blast. I appreciate I didn't want to just like go, hey, well, ball pythons and genetics. Like I really wanted to have a show like to get like just you be you because you're such a character, man. So I'm glad we got the chance to get to know you a little bit tonight. And share some of that knowledge. I mean, I definitely put a couple of new tools in my toolbox. Just some of the concepts and things that you operate with. It's different than the same old stuff that you hear over and over. But then there's also underlying reinforcements of, following your passion, don't follow trends. And there's some things that are just like 101. You know what I mean? If you breeder wannabe breeder 101, and if you're not drilling those points into your head, and it's great to hear the stalwarts out there in the industry say the same thing because then you go, wow, that's good advice. If I don't follow anything, I need to follow this. So, man, I appreciate it. Where are you going to be? You're going to be in Dallas. That's at NR as in September, right? You're going to be at
Um,
that.
I how about this? I may be in Loveland, Colorado at the end of the month for Show Me Reptiles.
Okay.
I'm looking to get a couple tables for the Schaumburg NARBC in August.
Oh, yeah.
I'm working on, I should be vending Bob's show in Atlanta in August.
Yeah.
I will be walking Daytona, and I'm sure somewhere in June and July you'll see me at some show me's in the Southeast or around the Midwest. But, I've been a real show whore in the past, and I really want to spend more time with the animals this year and focus on more online sales and having better production numbers. There was times in the past where I was doing 30 to 40 shows a year some years, and I would be on the road. I think I did 14 straight weekends on the road one year.
Wow.
And where I really enjoy the money in that, when you're away from things that much, you're going to miss ovulations.
Yep.
You're going to miss meals. There's going to be things that are going to affect your breeding year. And I really want to be a better breeder. So you will see me, but I'm going to try to cut it down to about one show a month. I think that's fair. And Pomona, I should be walking the Pomona show at the end of June.
Nice. Right on. You'll be able to meet Dredd. I'm planning on going to Repticon in South Haven, aka Memphis, coming up.
Yeah.
I'll see you at Daytona then. I believe I get to steal a little corner of the Harbin's table for these JVK
Oh,
enclosures.
nice.
So I'll be with them, but I'll be at Daytona. So I'm looking forward to that and the V Unit fam, and meeting some of the people up from that Patreon. And Emilio, and it'll be a good time. So looking forward to that one. I want to go to Dallas. I want to go to Bill's Chondro party the day before. So
Yes. Great time. I have been once. Very awesome facility. Love his collection. Love the whole atmosphere that weekend. If there
yeah,
was one reason to go back to Dallas, it'd be to be invited to that party again.
nice. Yeah, I didn't go last year. People had mentioned it, and I was like, I'm not going to invite myself. That's stupid. And then I got to meet Bill and Marshall and a bunch of the Chondro crew down there, and everyone was so gracious and nice. I was blown away. And Bill's like, dude, you should have came last night. And I'm like, yeah, well, he's like, you got to come next year. It's like, okay, if you say so. So I'm
Yeah.
honored, and I'm definitely going to Dallas, definitely going to Memphis, definitely going to Daytona. I'd like to make Tinley in October. I'll be going to St. Louis, see family and stuff. So I'll go to some St. Louis and ARBCs, I think in November. But yeah, for
Okay.
sure,
Well,
I will see you out there out there at some of these spots. I don't think I'll make Bob's again. I went in February. Bob's show is awesome. I love it.
yep. I think this past one especially, I loved this first one, this last one, the service, the guys he's got around him helping. Absolutely love Bob's show. I do a lot of the reptilian nations too in the United States. I'm a big fan of their shows. I don't really commit to one show. I have different shows I take different animals to, different states I go to with the intention of doing. When I go to Colorado, I'll probably bring a little more boas. Where there's some states my boa sales aren't good, and I kind of change it up from there. But
Interesting.
yeah, no, I'm going to be all over the place, man. I love going to the shows. I love the
How was
people, love the
Nashville? Wasn't
conversation.
that the first time for Troy's show out there?
So that was the first time for Troy's show, but that facility had a reptile show in it for the past 5 or 8 years. And there was a long running show in Nashville. It was a local pet club that would run it, a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a show. It was actually about 2 times the size of what this weekend show was, but it was an all pet expo.
Oh
And I
wow!
want to say it was $2 to come in for the general public. Table fees were fairly cheap. I want to say we would get like 8 to 10 tables, and they were like $45 a piece.
Wow.
And we did very well at that show. I think they would get like 10,000 people through the door at that show sometimes. So their show this past weekend, familiar crowd coming out, familiar facility for the locals. Of course, when you're not charging $2 and you got to charge 10 or 15 to come in, you're gonna have a few less people. But I thought it was a good atmosphere. I thought everyone was really happy at the end of the weekend. We did well. I'll definitely go back to the next one. I don't think they're going to have a fall show unless a date opens up,
Okay.
but they will be back next spring.
Yes, I really wanted to go. It's about 4 hours for me. I really wanted to go. It just didn't work out for this month, unfortunately. But that's cool. I'm glad to hear it. I've heard nothing but glowing reports about that from out of Colorado, out of Kansas, out of Charlotte, and now Nashville. Everyone's really been pretty thrilled, and the footage I've seen on YouTube of that show looks pretty awesome too. So that's really great. Very cool.
Yep.
Yep, that was
I
one
like
thing I meant
Troy a
to ask
lot.
earlier.
Oh, go ahead. I'm listening.
No, that's what I want. I forgot earlier. I wanted to ask you about how was Nashville. So that's really great to hear. And for me, it's quasi local at least. It's not terrible. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I would recommend going. I'm sure that's going to be a city they stay in for a long time. I love Nashville. I love the food in Nashville. Harbins are there. A lot of other breeders. BC. A lot of people I like to see. Like I said, it's everybody who does their shows are all good friends of mine. So every time I'm out there, there's always a lot of people to talk to.
hell yeah, hell yeah. Yeah, Harbin said they had a fun time at that show for sure. The Harbins have fun wherever they go. Let's be honest. I mean, you can't have fun and not, and be the Harbin. I mean, those, I don't know. They're just so personable. I love them. They're
Yep. No,
always,
very personable family.
they're awesome. Man, I appreciate your time tonight, and you have your hands full at that new facility. I did not know you had that many animals, so thanks for sharing your vast knowledge across species. Like I said, I didn't want to bore you today with ball python everything. So, when we chatted in Atlanta, I kind of hinted like, man, I want to see what else you're about, and you're like, oh, thank God. So I'm glad we were able to
Yeah.
kind of. Yeah, I feel like it was a teaching show. Like, and I didn't realize the number of species. So, man, there's much to learn, and I'll definitely keep an eye catching you. You're not really huge in social media, but we can always catch you on the trap Friday nights. Not Thursday so much nowadays, or am I wrong? Most just Fridays.
I think maybe every month or maybe every other month I'm going to kind of sit in because I do enjoy working with MJ. I like the conversation. We tend to go different directions. So I think you will see me off and on working with MJ on Thursday night, but for now I got the Friday night slot, and I'll bounce around that industry with some of the other channels. I'm always open to co-hosting with other guys there on Trap Talk, and I usually don't say no to a podcast. Where my
I didn't know
podcast I
that.
don't do.
I didn't know that,
Yeah.
man. So thanks so much for making time tonight. I wasn't sure if it would. I know you host your own, but I didn't know if you really spent time to be a guest. So, man, that was definitely cool. You say, yeah.
Well, I don't talk on my podcast. The podcasts that I do aren't about me; they're about the guests, and getting them to do most of the talking. So, these are the rare occasions where I can just not shut the fuck up for an hour and a half, and it's kind of nice.
That's what I'm talking about, man. We wanted to get to know Dave. Dude, it's been a pleasure, and thanks again so much for your time, and thanks for getting me addicted. I think the last time I saw you, I came up and jokingly cussed you out, and that's all in play. I love you, and I caught the addiction because I started going, getting into the heads and learning, and boy, you just turned on something that just became a knowledge thirst. So thank you for that. Honestly, from me and my daughter, that's her first snake pet, and then I got hooked. So I was already into other species, but you got me into ball pythons. So thank you, good sir. I appreciate you, and I'm sure more people will catch the bug as the years go by.
Cool, appreciate it. And like I said, come see me on Fridays and custom scales, morph market. I'm going to try to do more on social media. I take 10, 15, 20 pictures a day, and I send them to 10 or 15 people, and that's it.
Yeah, that's all right, man. Hey, you do you. It's working. No reason to reinvent the wheel. If you've got it working, man, keep it going for sure. For sure.
You could always be better, man. I got to be better with social media. I've been saying it for years.
Nah, that's all right. Hey, you're going to be on the road less. You're going to be vending less. So then you'll have more time for social media and being a better breeder, and it'll get even better, I bet, if the plan holds true.
Yep. Hopefully, man. And like I said, you ever want to do this again, just ask.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Anything I can do for you, I doubt it, but you let me know. I'll be happy to help. Hey, thanks for. I wanted to wear some tonight. Oh, I forgot. Look, I'm representing your fellow trap Sherpa, Krista.
Respect. Yeah, we just went herping a couple weeks ago. That's awesome.
I had to wear it tonight. I was like, I'm gonna wear something crazy and silly for Dave's honor. So I had to wear this, but I was already sporting Krista's shirt, and I messaged her earlier. I said, hey, I got to represent the Trap Sherpas, the coolest podcast on the planet. So you guys rock. I definitely aspire to what you guys have. So keep on keeping on, my friend.
Awesome. You keep doing your thing, and I'll see you sooner or later. I was just in Jackson, man, like a week ago. Sad not to see you there.
Oh, I know. This month is terrible. I have to move, so I have not gone to any reptile shows. But yeah, it was on my radar. I just did not get down there. But yeah, I'll see you down there at that show again. That's one of the nearest. So. All right, brother. Be good. I'll see you backstage. And everyone, thanks for watching tonight. I appreciate you. Thanks for coming through, everyone, from the TikTok land also. Hey, Ryan out in California. Thanks, brother, for checking us out. That's my dude. And you guys have a great rest of the night. We'll